So then, I've swapped the camera angle and now we can take a detailed look at what I'm doing with my hands as we go along. We've got our prepared item, we've selected a peanut butter jar and we've painted the lid so that it's nice and blank and you can't see the words through the top. So I'm just going to put the jar off to one side because what I want to do is decorate the lid. I've got my paper here and just over here I've got my glue. I'm just going to pop the lid off it. I'm going to use it just as it is, but you can decant it if you want to into a little tub to use it from there because this is quite huge. And I've also got a brush ready and a pair of scissors to cut the sheet out. So this is a simple technique. You take your lid, you take your paper, you cut a whole shape out from your paper and you put it on in its entirety onto the item that you're doing. Now this is great for small items with small areas and preferably not too curved. It does work, the mosaic works better on very curved surfaces, but if it's a flat one like this where you've just got the curve around the edge, you will get overlapping at the edge, which doesn't look too bad, I don't think. The small flat surfaces are better for this technique on the whole. Now you can either glue the whole lot and then you'd glue it up, you'd cut it out, glue the whole lid and then you'd place it down very gently and smooth it down all the way around the outside. But what I'm going to do today is another technique where you do a strip of glue and you put the paper on and then you do another strip of glue and push the paper down. It's a much more versatile technique that you can use with the napkins, so check in the advanced tips for the napkins and you'll be able to use this technique with the strips of glue to put your napkins onto your items as well. But it works well with the Decopatch paper, so that's not a problem. Right, so let's get going. I am going to cut round my lid. So I do like this paper, I have used it before. I'm going to put it on the wrong side down. Put my jar out of the way, give yourself some space. And I'm going to, I'll cut the square out first because it'll be easier. You can draw around the lid if you want to with a pencil softly, because remember the paper's really quite thin. But it's just as easy. Make sure this length is enough to wrap under here. So you don't want to, you want to be able to do that and you, fold this over rather than being short on here and have to put more paper on. So I reckon about there. It is very thin paper, it does rip very easily. There we go, so I've got my initial shape, so I can put my Decopatch paper out of the way. I do tend to do that because I get glue everywhere when I get going, so pop it out there. Right, so let's put those there and have a look at what we're doing. So I've got a little bit of a crease there, so I'm going to fold the crease back so it's a bit flatter for me. That's fine. Now, turn it over, and I'm going to put the little paper there. I'm going to grab some glue out of the pot here, and then I'm just going to put some glue. Now there's a lot of glue on here, this is a little bit too much, so I'm going to take a little bit off and then just put the glue on, but put it on quite thinly. You don't want to be too thick with it. And put it around the edge a little bit as well, it doesn't hurt, so that everywhere gets stuck. So I've just done a strip on the lid. I'm not going to do all the lid. And then what I'm going to do, put that there. So right side up, and I'll turn it this way a little bit. I've got some kitchen roll over there. And I'm going to just make sure there's enough. Make sure there's enough to go around your lid. This is where the pencil mark comes in handy if you've drawn around the jam jar lid, because you can see exactly where you need to start. Then I'm just going to press the paper against, very gently, against the glue and into the creases, and like that. There we go. You can go back under afterwards anyway. Now you can get as many creases out as you want. this will naturally, especially with the curves, there will be creases in the top of your item or in the surface of your item when you're finished. It's very, very difficult. There are some tutorials on YouTube on how to get creases out or how to minimise them. But I like it because I think it gives the piece a bit more character if it's not absolutely perfect and a little bit of creases. It gives it a bit more of a rustic feel. So I've done my first strip and that's down. Don't work it too much because when the paper gets wet it will actually rub off. Then I peel it back, probably still got enough glue on my brush, and I put another strip of glue under there, like that. I take out these ridges here, I'll take those out, and then I'll push the paper onto the glue again, try and get the bubbles out where possible, and then I'll keep going. I'll grab a bit more glue. And I'll keep going, doing that, pushing the glue right up to underneath, so you want the glue right into here. That's it, you see a bit better there. Take all your ridges, many of the thick ridges out of your glue as possible. You will have some ridges, but you want the thin ones. Do it in a strip, get into all the little nooks and crannies, and then very gently with your fingers, just mind the glue that you get everywhere. I told you I'd get glue everywhere, didn't I? I always do. And then I've got some little creases coming in, but I don't mind. I'm just going to smooth those down very gently. As I say, be very careful as the paper gets wet. Sometimes less is more, and it will rub off. So you can always go back and put a bit more glue on and soften the paper up again. A little bit of glue, so again, do your lid. Kitchen towel in a bit. Press that down onto the top. And then the final stretch, last little bit of glue, as you see, just in here. That out the way might actually be a bit more light for you to see. There we go. Now that wasn't very much glue at all, so we'll see how we go. Oh, it's enough. Yeah, you don't need a lot of glue really. It's very good stuff. And there I think you can probably just see the outline of the lid in there. Now what you can do is you can leave this to dry. I do sometimes if I'm doing a lot of work with things. What I'm going to do today is I'll just carry on. I'm going to round this up a little bit so that we've got less paper to fold in. There we go. And don't throw away these little extra bits that you're cutting off, because with Decopatch, with the next technique, you'll see that you can use little bits like this. So I have a little bag that I keep all my little bits in. Next stage is to just cut so that you can fold your pieces in, as many cuts as you want. Doesn't have to be too frilly, they can be quite thick. Yeah, so I'd keep your little bits, because you use little bits with the next technique, and it just means that you don't waste them. And we don't like waste, do we? We're crafters, we don't waste stuff. Right, so I've got a plain section of my lid here, and I've got my little foldy bits all cut and ready. So again, I'll just do a section. I'm not too worried about doing the whole lot in one go. Not too thick. And what I can see is under here, the paper's not stuck just under here. Oh, some of the paint's chipped off as well. I don't think that'll make any difference. So I'm just going to put the glue under there as well. Try not to be too thick with it. And then put it round over the rim. Then you can just fold your papers up, push them into the creases. Now you will find that, like this one, that they'll start to crease. That's fine, just press them flat. and if you need to, just give them a little bit of glue on the outside to soften them up, and then they'll come up, and then it gets all over your fingers again, which is pretty normal when you're doing this. Nice to get messy. Can't beat a bit of mess. So again, I can see on here that I just need to, oh, got some glue there. I just need to take the glue under there a little bit so I've covered everywhere, and then bring it down to the edge of the lid and under like that, and then you just keep going round. So, oops, a little bit more. Don't need a lot of glue. Fold your edges under. Make sure, it is worth making sure that you're getting into the ridge here, so you've got good definition on your lid. It shows off the pattern a little bit more, I always think. And push that one in. Grab a bit more glue and literally go all the way around this time. You can do as much as you feel happy doing. Depends on how quick you are. The glue dries fairly quickly, so it is worth bearing that in mind, because if you want to go a bit slower, you might need to do less glue and then catch up as you go along. And then just press the pieces round like that. Press them up. There we go, it's sticking better. Sometimes you get glue on your hands and then it starts sticking to the paper and pulling the paper around into strange ways. That's not a good thing. I'd clean your hands at that point, because it can tear the paper. As I say, when the paper gets wet, it gets quite delicate. So I'm just going around making sure I've got everything in where I want it. And then what I'm going to do is grab another last bit of glue and whiz it round on the inside of the lid, ready for these to fold under and stick. Oops. That's it. So give that a good layer of glue on the inside. Put my brush there, and then you just fold these in and press them onto the paper all the way around on your jam jar, well, actually peanut butter jar in my case. What do you have in your house? Do you have jam, or do you have peanut butter? Do you have jelly or marmalade maybe? Because all the jars can be used. As I say, I've used mango chutney jars. I've used Indian sauce jars, like your Rogan Josh or your tikka masala. Anything's fair game, to be honest, as long as it's that's stuck a little strangely. So I'm just going to lift it very gently. That's it. Anything's fair game, it doesn't matter. It looks just like a jar once it's lost all its labels. Although some do have the brand name embossed in the glass, so watch out for those, but sometimes that enhances it, you know, it makes it look even better. Right, there we go. So you can see we've covered that completely. We've got no logo coming through, and we've gone from, here's one that is still blank. So we've gone from a very blank lid to a very nicely patterned lid, and this is just the putting the paper on. What we need to do now is to let this dry completely. Looking on the inside, I would actually, before we let it dry completely, I'd take another little bit of glue. We've got some little pieces sticking up in here, so what I'm going to do is just put some glue on them, which will soften them down, make them a bit wetter. Pop some glue on just to finish them off. Like that, so that everything is in the position we want it in. Like that. Oops, that's it. Now I wouldn't put this back on the jar to dry. We're covering drying later, and I'll show you how is best to do it. Don't put it back on the jar to dry, because if you put it on and it's still wet, obviously it's going to glue in place, which may or may not be the thing that you want to happen. So check out the drying section for what to do next, but this needs to go and dry, and then we can look at putting a finishing coat on it afterwards. So that's the whole sheet technique. Very good for small flat areas, and very fast, and efficient, and it maintains the original pattern. So you can see from the original paper, that's got the original pattern still on it without any changes, and it's really good for preserving the pattern like that. The mosaic one will mix the pattern up. And that's it for the whole sheet section. Let's move on to the second technique. So here we go with the mosaic technique. This is probably one of the most widest used and the most versatile of all of the techniques, and is an absolute joy to do. So I've got my blank here. I'm going to pop that there under there, and I'm going to grab my paper. Now I've chosen the silver snake skin just because I like it, and I'm going to rip little pieces of the paper off, just randomly, quite small in this particular case. Sometimes it looks better if you do consistently small. It depends what kind of effect you want to create. I personally wouldn't mix really large pieces with lots of little pieces, but it's entirely up to you. It's your creative license, and you can do that. I just think that you get a better sort of consistent look to your piece if you've got lots of little pieces or lots of big pieces, but what do I know? We're all in this and being creative together, aren't we? So I've ripped a couple of pieces off. The reason I haven't used the scissors is because these edges are quite furred and torn and random. And it is actually easier when you start putting things onto the items, it's easier to merge the pattern together. There aren't obvious lines where the scissors have gone through and cut the paper. So you can cut the paper, that's not a problem. You would cut the paper if you wanted to create a design that was just like a cross like that, and you wanted to paper this side. I would absolutely recommend that you cut the paper along the line here for the different design over here. You can also use it for frames. So if you want to do the edge of a frame on the inside and put an extra piece on something different on the middle, then you would neaten up the edges with scissors then. And also if you were just putting the paper on the top here and coming up to these corners but not going any further, then again that would be a really good place, a straight edge to put your scissors through and make it straight. But for the general mosaic technique, I'm going to stick with the random. So I'll pop those just there, the way up so I see the pattern. And I'm going to open my glue up again. I've got my kitchen roll out this time. Oops, papers go everywhere when you do that. I've got my kitchen roll this time to put me paintbrush on because it's just cleaner and I don't have to tidy up so much afterwards. I can just throw the paper away. I'm just going to use the glue out of the lid at the moment because that's a whopping great jar and I don't need that much right now. So similar to doing a whole sheet, you just put a little bit of glue on, spread it out fairly thinly on the top of your item, then you can start to pick up your mosaic pieces and pop them on wherever you want basically. So I'm actually going to fold that one over the edge. Sometimes it's a good idea to use the brush at this point to lift things around and place them around. It doesn't matter that you get a little glue on the outside. Now what I'm going to do is put the next piece right up against the last piece, right there, and a little bit of overlap in this area here. And you'll see that I haven't got any glue under there, so I'm going to put some, brush it down, and then what I've created is a gap. Does it say? Oh, this actually says basil seeds. So we obviously used to use this box of basil seeds at one point, so I'm going to cover it and use it for something nicer. But we've ended up with a little gap just here in the pattern. So if you want to leave gaps, that's entirely up to you. I'm going to put a bit more glue on, select a small piece and pop that over the top there. But because that goes around the corner, I'm going to pop that under there and then press it down And then I've got a choice here. I either go underneath, I think I'm just going to snip it off. Totally legitimate use of your scissors. And then just very carefully fold a little bit under so that it doesn't go right the way onto the inside. And that really is the technique in a nutshell. You just continue. You put quite a lot of glue on if you want to speed up a little bit. So you can just continue to put. I've got sort of a square piece there, so I'm going to sort of match that over there so I haven't got any gaps. A little bit of glue underneath. And then, like I say, be careful because I can feel this glue already drying. I've got a little pointy bit there. It is kind of fun sometimes just matching the mosaic pieces to the squares and shapes that you've got. But you see they're going on random, and the original pattern, which is just here, has changed and is starting to be something a little bit different. It'll be absolutely unique every time you do it. Don't worry if your glue dries out, just put some more over the top. Be careful with your brush on the paper, because once it's got wet with the glue it will start to just focus. It will start to be soft and rip a lot more easily, so do be aware of that. I'm neglecting my sides a little bit, so I'm just going to pop one of these on. You do get natural edges to the paper, which you can also use if you're doing things like that. And pop that on. Just I've already got a piece here and I'm just about to fold a piece over on top of it. It doesn't matter, but as you can see where the rip is here, it kind of merges in as you put the glue on. Kind of merges everything in and keeps everything flowing around your picture. And you just literally keep going until your item is as covered as you want it to be, with as many patterns as you want. Like I say, you can leave gaps if that's what you want to leave. If you've got another colour underneath that you want to come through and be on display, that's fine. If you want to cut all the pieces out, there was, I think in the papers section, there was a square patchwork pattern. There was it was just squares of different patterns all put together on the paper. With something like that, you could quite easily cut out the pieces and put them on how you want to. It's up to you how much paper you rip off at a time. I don't like ripping off too much because you don't know what shape you're going to need or what amount you're going to need, and I'm not a big fan of waste, so I tend to just do a few as I go along and then stop and have a bit of a rip, which is quite therapeutic actually, having a bit of a rip, and then get back to my gluing and stuff. I'm not going to do the whole one while he's sitting here watching me. I shall refrain from that. But I think you can see, you just take your piece, pop it on where you want it. I'm just, because the pattern's fairly random on the top, I'm just doing a fairly random selection of. That's it. I'm doing a fairly. See, you got that kind of shape, and you've got matching shape here, so you tend to cover it, and then I've left myself the tiniest little gap in there, but it just so happens I've got the tiniest little piece of paper here, so I'm just going to dump that right over the top of that because I can. I just happen to have the right size paper. Then I've got this kind of shape in here, which coincidentally I've got on here. It's left with a really funny shape over here, but that's fine, I can just cover that in its entirety. And you literally just keep going until the whole piece is covered. I'll get away and do that, and I'll flash back in a minute with the final piece so you can see what it is. Okay, quick fast forward and we're back again, and I've finished the as much as I'm going to do on the lid today. It's still wet and I've still got little bits hanging off, but that's okay. I've left these bits hanging off, and maybe an extra couple of little bits not completed, they can be done in a bit. I've left a little bit hanging off because the paper's still quite damp, and when I cut them off flush to the edge here, I don't want to rip the papers in the process and glue up all the scissors. So I'm going to wait for it to dry, and I'm going to cut off the dangly edges then. I've also left one side pretty dry and not too gluey. Really I shouldn't have put those glue bits on, but it is actually dry now. It dries fairly quickly. And the reason I've done this is because it needs a surface to dry on. I'll cover this in detail in the drying section, so don't worry about it. But before you start decorating, have a think about how you're going to actually let your item dry without it sticking to a surface. And then while that's off and drying, you can always go on to a second part of your item or a different item and carry on decopatching that, so you don't have to stop as soon as you've got to the end of your first item, which is the lovely thing about crafting. You can carry on for as long as you want. So that's it for the mosaic. Let's move on to the third and final technique, cutting things out and sticking them on. And so we come to the final technique that you can use with your Decopatch, and this is cutting out, pop that there for a second, cutting out shapes in your paper that you like, that you want to just stick on to a surface to decorate it. Now these are obviously very delicate and tiny and will take quite a long time. These Russian dolls on the Russian doll paper are a little bit easier to cut out. What you can see with these Russian dolls though, is the point I do want to make, is that the papers are quite thin, and if you have an underlying pattern it can come through. I don't know if you can see that very easily. It can come through, especially onto the face here, and actually affect the shape that you're sticking on. So I wanted to stick a heart onto my box. This is now been done completely. I've done all the edges and the top, and it's nice and dry. I'd leave it at least, with the Mod Podge, I'd leave it at least an hour. You don't have to wait the full 72 for it to cure fully. You can actually go before then. And then I'm going to grab my scissors. What I'm going to do first, before I cut it out though, is I'm just going to have a look, and this is why it's better if the surface is dry. You can place your paper against the surface and you can see how much of the pattern comes through to affect your shape on the top. Sometimes this is an effect that you actually want. That one's better, that's even more obscure than that one. And that one I just don't think goes with the paper, so that gold one is quite nice and is quite a contrast to that silver paper. But I think my actual favourite is that one, and I only get a little bit of the pattern coming through. If your object was wet, you can't really put the paper on to have a look and see what it's looking like, because it'd stick and then you'd have problems and you'd wreck the paper and you'd get through quite a bit that way, and it wouldn't be particularly good for your object. So wait till it's dry, stick it on, have a look, and then when you're happy with what you've got, you can grab the scissors and give it a good cut out. I picked something really nice and simple, so it shouldn't. This is where you see my scissor skills. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it out first, and then come back. Put it over there. I bet you're glad now I didn't do one of the chickens, aren't you? Been here for hours. Right. Quick. Cut around those. Not the absolute best, but I think I'm quite happy with that. apart from a little bit of pink there that I don't want. Yeah, that'll do me. I'll fold that back. Right, so I've got my heart cut out and ready to go. And I'm going to pop it on the surface there. I like hearts, they're kind of cheerful and happy and loving. So again, not too much glue, decide where you want it. Now it doesn't matter with Mod Podge, the glue comes out white but it dries clear. So it doesn't matter if you get a bit liberal. I wouldn't put it on thickly, but you can put it on quite a large area, like that. And then you can figure out where you want it. Right there, and then just very gently smooth it down like that, and you've got a heart right in the middle. Again, you will get creases, the glue's soaking into the paper now. I'm just now going to put a very gentle, I'm not going to do this hard at all, this will make the paper even wetter and softer. So it is important not to put too much pressure on with your brush. But I just want to take out the little bubbles that came up. The paper started to wrinkle because of the glue. And then I just want to take those wrinkles down to the minimum. So I'm going to press down with them. I don't want that sort of bobbly texture, so I am going to smooth that out a bit. It will keep the bobbly texture. This is the gloss glue, so it will catch the light and you will see a bobbly texture if you're not careful. Or if that's what you want to create, because that's also possible. So that's as many of the creases softened down as I can. So I'm happy with that. All the edges, right the way up to the edges, so nothing's going to come off. And that is ready to go and dry. And once it is, it'll be ready for its final coat. And you'll have a choice of what kind of final coat to put on. So that's the third technique. You now have all the techniques that you need to be able to decopatch just about any object that you want to try. What I would recommend very, very sincerely is that you don't try to decopatch any of your pets or any of your partner or your kids. They probably won't appreciate it, and it's not particularly a safe thing to do. It might be funny though. Just don't decopatch your partner and your kids and your pets. Anything else is pretty much fair game. And you can do, if you check in the later sections under advanced tips and extra glues, you can do outdoor items as well, so you can use this indoors and you can use it outdoors. Okay, on to the next section and we'll talk about the drying and finishing.